Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into something pretty transformative, I think. It's how the command line itself is changing.
Yeah, it's moving beyond just, typing commands.
Exactly. Imagine your terminal becoming this conversational AI-powered space, and that's where Google's new Gemini CLI comes in. It's a big strategic move.
Definitely. And we've been digging into the source material, Google's own docs, the technical specs, and crucially, what early users are saying about it.
Okay, great. So let's unpack this. Our goal today, we want to dissect what Gemini CLI really is, who it's actually built for, what makes it stand out, how you can install and use it, its current, let's say, quirks.
The limitations.
Right, limitations,
Right.
and where it fits against rivals, and maybe get a sense of Google's bigger picture here. So let's start right there. What is Gemini CLI at its core? Because it sounds like more than just, well, a CLI.
That's right. It's really not just another chatbot dropped into your terminal. Fundamentally, it's an open source AI agent.
An agent. Okay, what does that mean in practice?
So an agent isn't just reactive. It understands a goal you give it, and then it actively takes steps to achieve that goal. It uses something called a reason and act loop, or REACT.
React.
Yeah, the AI reasons it makes a plan. Then it uses built-in tools like running shell commands or editing files.
Yeah.
And then it observes the outcome of its actions to figure out the next step. It's iterative, like how a person works through a problem.
Got it. So it's actively doing things, not just suggesting. Can you give us a quick example of that?
Sure, think about debugging. You could say, hey, fix this error in my code. Gemini CLI might then read the error log, reason about the cause, modify the relevant source file, maybe run the build command to check, and then verify if the fix actually worked. It's a whole sequence of actions.
Okay, that is a significant step up. What's
Yeah.
powering this? What's the brain here?
The brain is Google's Gemini 2.5 Pro model, which, by the way, you get access to even on the free tier, which is pretty huge.
Gemini 2.5 Pro, and wasn't there something about its technical specs that really stood out?
Absolutely. The headline feature is its massive 1 million token context window.
1 million tokens. Okay, remind us, what is a context window and why is that number such a big deal for you listening?
Right, so the context window is basically the AI's short-term memory. It's how much information it can consider at once when processing your request. 1 million tokens. That means it can potentially ingest and analyze, like, your entire code base,
The whole thing.
or huge PDF documents, long project histories, without you needing to manually feed it small chunks. The practical implication for you, it enables these really complex project-wide tasks. Think migrating a big app to a new framework or chasing a bug that touches files all across the repository. It sees the bigger picture.
That sounds incredibly useful, especially for larger projects. Now, Google made this open source Apache 2.0 license. Why that move seems strategically important.
Oh, definitely. It's smart on multiple levels. First, transparency builds trust. You or your security team can actually look at the code, see how it works, check for risks, addresses that whole black box AI concern.
Makes sense.
Second, it taps into the community. Open source invites contributions, finding bugs, adding features, making improvements. It helps the tool mature faster and builds a user base that's invested.
And I saw something about extensibility too. MCP, the Model Context Protocol. What's that about?
Yeah, MCP is basically an emerging open standard. Think of it as a common language for tools and services to provide rich, structured information to AI models.
Okay.
So by adopting MCP, Gemini CLI isn't locked into just its own built-in tools. It can connect to any server that speaks MCP. So you could potentially plug in tools for image generation or connect it to your GitHub repo for managing pull requests or internal company tools. It positions Gemini CLI as potentially becoming a central hub.
A hub. Interesting. And it's built using what tech?
TypeScript and Node.js. And crucially, it runs natively across platforms Windows without needing WSL, which is a big plus for many,
Oh, that is good.
and macOS and Linux, of course. So broad accessibility was clearly a goal. But there's a really important point here, kind of a fundamental tension. It's an open source tool, the CLI itself, but it has a closed source brain. The Gemini 2.5 Pro model doing the thinking. That's proprietary Google tech.
Ah, right. So you can see the tools code, but not the model's inner workings.
Exactly. You can verify the CLI won't just, delete your files without asking. But you can't see why the model might sometimes suggest doing something nonsensical or potentially harmful. It's a trust but verify scenario, but the verification only goes so far. Something to keep in mind, especially in sensitive environments.
Okay, that's a critical distinction. So with all this power, who is this tool really for? Who should be leaning in right now?
The main audience is definitely the technically proficient crowd. Think senior developers, DevOps engineers, MLOs folks, maybe tech leads or architects making decisions, people comfortable living in the terminal.
Right. So for you listening, if you're one of those people, what real problems does Gemini CLI aim to solve? What are the pain points it's targeting?
Several big ones. First, context switching. Constantly bouncing between your terminal, your code editor, the browser, documentation.
Ugh, yes, the daily grind.
Gemini CLI wants to pull more of those tasks into the terminal, keeping you focused, keeping you in the flow, more efficiency, basically. Second, the cost. Let's face it, some of the top-tier AI coding assistants aren't cheap. Gemini CLI's free tier is, well, it's incredibly generous. 1,000 requests a day with that powerful Gemini 2.5 Pro model.
1,000 a day. Wow.
Yeah, it really lowers the barrier, makes powerful AI accessible to students, hobbyists, small teams, open source projects, people who might otherwise be priced out. Third is tool fragmentation. Developers juggle so many different tools. Gemini CLI is positioned as a potential unifier, a single interface to do things that might currently need 3 or 4 separate applications. And finally, there's the issue of static AI knowledge. LLMs often have a knowledge cutoff date. Gemini CLI integrates Google Search directly,
Oh, clever.
so it can pull in real-time information to ground its answers, which is vital when you're dealing with the latest libraries or APIs.
That free tier does sound almost too good to be true. Is this Google just being generous, or is there a bigger strategy? You called it the open source and free tier gambit.
Well, it's classic Google strategy, right?
Yeah.
Definitely multifaceted. A huge part is data acquisition. Millions of developers using it for free. That's an immense source of real-world usage, data prompts, code, how people actually use it. That data is gold for training and improving the Gemini models. It's a massive feedback loop.
Right. The users help train the AI.
Then there's ecosystem lock-in. The CLI might be free, but where do you think many of the examples lead? Deploying to Google Cloud, using other Google services. It's a frictionless on-ramp into their paid ecosystem.
The classic funnel.
Exactly. And finally, it puts serious competitive pressure on others, especially subscription-based tools like, say, Anthropic's Claude Code. Offering something this powerful for free is designed to grab market share and make it harder for paid competitors.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense strategically. So we've covered the what and why. Let's get practical. How can you, the listener, actually get started with Gemini CLI?
Getting going is actually pretty straightforward. The main prerequisite is just having Node.js version 18 or newer. You can check with Node V.
Okay, Node 18 plus.
Then, for a quick tryout, you can use npx directly against the GitHub repo. The command's a bit long, we'll put it in the show notes, but it doesn't install it permanently.
Good for a quick test drive.
Right. For regular use, you'll want to install it globally using npm install-g at Google Gemini CLI. Just be sure you're getting the official at Google package, not some lookalike. You might need sudo on Linux or Mac.
Got it. Official package. What happens when you run it the first time? Authentication.
Yep. You run Gemini, it might ask for a color theme preference, then authentication. The recommended way, especially for that free tier, is log in with Google. It pops open your browser, you do the OAuth dance, and boom, you get a free Gemini Code Assist license. That's where the 1,000 requests per day comes from.
Okay, simple enough. What about paid or enterprise use?
For that, you typically use an API key. You generate one from Google AI Studio or Google Cloud's Vertex AI, then set it as an environment variable, Gemini API key.
Right. And can you customize its behavior, give it some project context?
Yes, absolutely. You can create a file named gemini.md in your project's root directory. This is neat. You put system prompts, style guidelines, maybe background info about the project in there, and Gemini CLI automatically loads it. It might even prompt you to save useful context there during conversations.
Oh, that is useful. Persistent context.
And for more advanced stuff like connecting to those MCP servers we mentioned, maybe GitHub, you could figure that in a settings.json file and a Gemini directory in your home folder.
So once it's set up, how do you actually use it day to day?
Well, there are two main modes. You can run Gemini by itself for an interactive mode, like a chat REPL, or you can use the prompt flag for non-interactive mode, feeding it a specific task, which is great for scripting or automation.
Interactive and scripted. Makes sense.
Inside the interactive mode, you've got helpful/commands. Like tools shows you what capabilities the agent has loaded. Memory show lets you inspect what's currently in its context.
Ah, checking its memory. Good.
Stats shows your usage. MCP lists configured servers. Auth lets you switch authentication methods. Pretty handy.
And interacting with files or the shell.
Easy. Use the @ symbol to add local files to the context,
Mm.
like at myco.pi or even at diagram.pne. It has multimodal capabilities. And if you just want to run a regular shell command without the AI involved, prefix it with an exclamation mark.
Hmm.
.git status, for instance.
For shell pass-through. Okay, what about safety? Does it just run any command it thinks of?
By default, no. It's designed to prompt you for permission
Right. Yeah.
before it does anything potentially impactful, like modifying files or running system commands, which is good.
Definitely good.
But
Yeah.
if you really trust it, or for specific automation scenarios, there's the YOLO flag.
Wait, seriously? YOLO. Seriously. YOLO. As in, you only live once. It disables all permission prompts and just automatically approves every action the agent decides to take.
Wow, okay. Use with extreme caution, I imagine.
Extreme caution. Only for trusted, well-tested automation. Don't just throw YOLO on everything.
Understood. So give us one really cool practical example of putting this all together.
Okay, how about this? I have attached a PDF of our app's user flow at userflow.pdf. Can you analyze the main journey described and generate just unit tests to cover those steps in at authmodule.test.js?
Nice. Multimodal input, understanding a document, generating code into a specific file. That's compelling.
Yeah.
All right, that all sounds incredibly promising. But let's do the reality check now. It's still new. What are the current limitations, the known issues that you need to be aware of?
Yeah, it's definitely labeled as a preview for a reason. Users are reporting a fair share of performance and reliability issues. Things like being slow, sometimes unresponsive. It's described as feeling buggy or less polished than more mature tools.
So expect some hiccups. Expect hiccups. And sometimes it just ignores or misinterprets instructions, which can be frustrating. We're also seeing document cases of model hallucinations, like it might confidently suggest using a library that doesn't actually exist.
Ouch. That could waste time.
Or it might just fail on complex tasks, churning through its reasoning steps, using up your quota, but ultimately not achieving the goal. And despite that huge 1 million token window, some users still report context retention problems in longer back-and-forth sessions, like the agent loses track of the conversation.
Okay. Anything else causing major friction?
The big one seems to be the rate-limiting paradox on the free tier.
The 429 too many requests errors.
Exactly. Users hit those limits frequently, especially with complex tasks that require lots of internal steps from the agent. And when that happens, it often seems to silently downgrade the model being used, from the powerful Gemini 2.5 Pro to the much less capable Gemini 2.5 Flash.
Silently, so you might not even know it switched.
Right. And then the CLI itself might pop up a message suggesting you get a paid API key to avoid the rate limits.
Yeah.
Which, understandably, leads to users feeling like it's a bit of a bait and switch.
Yeah, I can see how that would undermine goodwill. Offer this amazing free tier, then make it hard to actually use reliably without paying.
Precisely. There are also some installation snags reported, particularly on Windows with the global NPM install, and some edge cases around needing undocumented environment variables for certain enterprise setups.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting here is the underlying strategy. Google seems to have prioritized getting this out fast, capturing mind share, disrupting competitors.
Even if it's not fully baked yet?
Right. They're effectively leveraging the free user base as a massive public beta test group. The generous free tier is, in a sense, the compensation for putting up with the current instability.
So the advice for listeners is?
Be excited, experiment, but don't bet your critical production workflows on it just yet, not without very careful human oversight and validation of everything it does.
Got it. So across the board, that free tier and the open source angle are Gemini CLI's main differentiators right now.
Absolutely. That's its calling card. Unmatched free access to a state-of-the-art model combined with open source transparency for the tool itself.
Okay, looking forward then. Where does this go? What's the long-term vision for Gemini CLI? What impact could it have?
Well, the immediate roadmap hints are pretty exciting. Google engineers have mentioned wanting to add support for local models. Think running models like Google's own open source Gemma family directly on your machine.
Oh, wow, that would be huge for privacy, offline use, cost.
Exactly. Huge potential there. We should also expect continued ecosystem expansion via MCP. More integrations, official and third-party, connecting to project management tools, CI/CD systems, databases, maybe internal company APIs, turning it into that central hub we talked about.
More connections, more power.
And because it's open source, community contributions will be vital for hardening it, fixing bugs, and adding the features developers really need, like maybe more granular permissions than just YOLO.
Makes sense. What about the bigger picture impacts, say, on DevOps?
This is where it could get really revolutionary. Think natural language CI/CD. Instead of writing complex YAML files infrastructure as code, you might move towards infrastructure as conversation.
Just telling it what pipeline you want.
Yeah. Create a pipeline that builds my Docker image, runs the tests, and deploys to staging on Google Cloud Kubernetes Engine. The agent figures out the steps and potentially generates the necessary config or runs the commands. It dramatically lowers the barrier to entry for complex DevOps, and that extends to agentic cloud management. Imagine agents that can not only deploy, but also monitor, diagnose failures, propose fixes, maybe even modify infrastructure configuration or application code, and redeploy automatically. True autonomous operations are still a way off, but this is a step in that direction.
The self-healing systems.
Potentially.
Eh?
The vision seems to be for Gemini CLI to evolve beyond just an assistant into a central orchestrator, unifying your entire development lifecycle, IDE, Git, CI/CD, cloud, all through this conversational interface.
That's a powerful vision. But you mentioned a new risk earlier. Infrastructure as conversation sounds great, but what's the downside?
Right. This introduces a critical new challenge: prompt-based infrastructure drift.
Okay, unpack that.
With traditional infrastructure as code, IAC, your infrastructure state is defined declaratively in code, like Terraform or CloudFormation files. It's versioned, auditable, deterministic. If you run the same code, you expect the same result.
The foundation of modern DevOps, basically.
Exactly. But if you start managing infrastructure primarily through natural language prompts given to an AI agent, well, natural language is inherently ambiguous. The agent's interpretation of your prompt might vary slightly between runs or based on updates to the model.
So you lose that determinism, you might ask for the same thing twice and get slightly different infrastructure.
Precisely. That's the drift. The state of your infrastructure could slowly diverge from what you intended or what's documented simply because the agent interpreted a prompt differently this time. It breaks the core principle of IAC.
That sounds potentially chaotic. How do we manage that?
It necessitates a whole new discipline. We're starting to see talk of prompts as code. We need best practices for writing clear, unambiguous prompts, versioning those prompts like we version code, rigorously validating the execution plans the agent generates before it acts, and ensuring the agent's actions always result in auditable, declarative artifacts like updated IAC files that get committed back to source control. We need to maintain that declarative source of truth.
So treat the prompts themselves as critical code artifacts. That's a fascinating challenge. Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. Gemini CLI seems like this really compelling mix, doesn't it? On one hand, it's strategically brilliant, incredibly powerful and potential, dropping the barrier to entry for advanced AI assistants way down with that free tier and open source approach.
Yeah, the context window, the agentic capabilities, it's genuinely significant.
But on the other hand, it's clearly still in preview. It's raw, it's unpolished, sometimes unreliable. The immense promise is definitely there, but it's bumping up against some real-world usability issues right now.
That's a fair summary. So for you, the listener, if you're an individual developer, student, hobbyist, absolutely dive in. Use it for learning, for experimenting, for rapid prototyping on non-critical stuff. That free tier and context window are fantastic for exploration.
But with a caveat.
But with the caveat.
Yeah.
Be cautious relying on it for anything production critical right now. Treat it like a very smart, but occasionally flaky pair programmer. You need to review and validate its work carefully.
And for tech leads, managers, decision makers.
Encourage experimentation, definitely. Let teams try it out on non-critical projects, maybe in sandbox environments, but probably hold off on deep, enterprise-wide integration into critical workflows until it matures. Wait for the performance to stabilize, the bugs to get ironed out, and maybe more clarity on the security posture around that closed source model brain. Phased adoption is key.